Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first ever inaugural meeting of the Global Future Councils. This is the annual meeting of Global Future Councils, meeting here for the first time in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Thank you for those of you here in the room joining us, and a very warm welcome to our audience watching live online at weforum.org and via our Facebook channel. The very first time we'll be broadcasting via Facebook. The purpose of this conference is to literally open the meeting. Proceedings have kicked off about an hour ago. The council members of the Global Future Councils are deep in deliberation, deep in council mode, hopefully articulating and originating ideas and solutions that are going to help solve the challenges and opportunities that await us. In order to give a bit of context about this meeting and help you understand and navigate your way through the next 2 days, because we have a very packed program of sessions here in the briefing room, but also via Facebook Live, and also with news that's going to be coming out. I've got a panel of 3 colleagues here, each with a unique angle. They're all colleagues of mine from the World Economic Forum. The first person I'm going to ask to speak is Stefan Mergenthaler, Head of Knowledge Networks. This is his meeting. He's the one who's in charge of putting together the Global Future Councils. He's going to talk a little bit about the vision and what these councils are here to try to achieve. Miroslav Duzek is our Head of Middle East and North Africa, a long-time colleague and who's been in this region a long time and can give a bit of context as to the work of the forum, and also a bit more information on the partnership here in the region with various governments, including the United Arab Emirates. Nicholas Davis, Head of Society and Innovation, one of the key members of the forum team when it comes to looking into and developing our thinking around the 4th Industrial Revolution. Of course, this is a concept that we first started articulating in Davos this year in January 2016 with the publication of Professor Klaus Schwab's book, The 4th Industrial Revolution. And since then, we haven't really stopped. We've been kind of developing these ideas, trying to get a bit of a feeling for how the world is changing all around us. Stefan, I'm going to first ask you just to give us a bit of an idea of what the Global Future Councils are.
Thank you, Ollie. Well, we're delighted to launch the inaugural meeting of the network of Global Future Councils here in Dubai. The network is composed of more than 800 leading experts from around the world who are nominated for a 2-year term to jointly explore the future. And there are 35 councils, half of which are focused on some of the large global challenges, from the future of work, the future of production, economic growth and social inclusion. How can we drive more inclusive growth, to environmental issues? And the second half of the council is dedicated to what we call the enablers of the 4th Industrial Revolution. So technologies from artificial intelligence and robotics to biotechnologies, brain sciences, and so on. And it's really this combination of, on the one hand, a deep exploration of scientific and technological progress, and on the other hand, a search for solutions to some of the great social, economic, and political dislocations, the social, economic, and political transformations that we're seeing as we're moving into a world of 9 billion people. That is absolutely key here. And in this context, we need an inspirational narrative about the future. We need an ability to actually shape policies and frameworks today that bring us into a future that we desire, and that's the mission for these councils. And they'll start their work here in Dubai and continue over the next 2 years, hopefully to inspire actions by leaders in policy, as well as the private sector. So we look forward to this meeting here.
Thank you, Stefan. And plenty of opportunities to meet Stefan during the next couple of days. Mirek, over to you. I'd love to know more about your work and your experiences here in the region as you see the region, you collaborate with partners much more regularly than we do here in terms of their preparedness for the 4th Industrial Revolution.
Thanks, Ollie. We're excited to be here. Yesterday, Professor Schwab met Minister Gargawi and the Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdallah and they reminisced that actually both the UAE and the World Economic Forum were born in 1971. It has been a great partnership. Professor Schwab himself also reminisced that he came here in the 1970s, and as you all know, this country, I think, embodies rapid and deep transformation. If you look at the pictures from the 1970s and you look at Dubai and Abu Dhabi and other places here now, you see what an amazing story this country has been. And so this really reflects, I think, the overall partnership. We've been collaborating with the UAE over all these decades in different forms. And this is, for us, a new partnership, an exciting new partnership, reflecting not only the future orientation of the UAE, which is clear if you look around here, the forward-looking strategies that we are seeing here, but also it reflects the reality that we have right now in the world, as Stefan just explained. So just to say that this is really stemming from a very unique partnership that we've had over the decades. Now, the UAE and the region, I work on the Middle East and North Africa, and also yesterday the participants in the meeting reminisced how the UAE and Dubai as well has evolved within the region, and really now it has become a source of not only progress but also hope for a lot of the people in different corners of the region. And so this is the right place for us to be, also to look at the different issues in the region overall: youth unemployment, infrastructure investments, entrepreneurship, education, also the geopolitical fragility, the humanitarian issues that we see in the region. UAE is active on all these fronts, and we're very happy to be here to then, of course, then take the messages from these councils, have them discussed at Davos at that global summit, but also then bring them to bear for our Middle East and North Africa conversations in Jordan at the Dead Sea next May.
Thanks, Nick, and I'd love to hear more about your work in the past year, developing on the concept of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Perhaps we could just start with telling us what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is.
Thanks, Ollie. Well, it's great to be here in Dubai and the Emirates, which is really, on the leading edge of exploring the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I think it is good to take a minute to unpack a little bit what these three words mean. The first point is, when we think about the Fourth Industrial Revolution on a very high level, what we're talking about is the convergence of a whole range of emerging technologies, particularly the convergence between digital, biological, physical technologies in ways that fundamentally change the way we create value as a society. The second thing to think of is, when we say the word industrial, we don't just mean manufacturing or production. We don't mean what others might call Industry 4.0. When we say industrial, we mean actually the creation of value. So the disruption that's occurring with emerging technologies are changes in the way that businesses, individuals, economies, civil society organizations and governments create, exchange, and distribute the things that we need to thrive in society. And so that's as true about 3D printing, or about new pieces of new algorithms within machine learning that really drive our capability to do everything from investigate genomic sequences, predict the way that humans behave in different ways, or indeed develop the world's latest, newest, lightest materials to transform our energy systems, our mobility systems, etc. A word on the fact that we say this is the fourth industrial revolution. Many of you will have seen some of the work we've done looking back at previous industrial revolutions, the first and classic industrial revolution at the end of the 19th century, the second industrial revolution, which produced essentially most of the technology you see around us today at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, And then the third industrial revolution being the revolution of personal computing, information revolution, digitization, which has produced so much of the infrastructure now that we rely on for this feed via Facebook, etc. The fourth industrial revolution is what builds on top of that. So it really is, in a way, it draws these digital elements together with other technologies. And that convergence operates in two ways. It's a convergence across the digital, physical, biological worlds to create new neurotechnological capabilities and solutions. But it's also a convergence with us as human beings. And if you think about the difference between an iPad or a television or a telephone to a system like virtual reality or augmented reality, which becomes closer and closer in shaping our very perception of the world, or forms of precision medicine, which change the very building blocks of nature of who we are, changing not just our genetic code, but also the way that our bodies express, or that a tree or a chemical expresses different properties. These are fundamentally exciting times with new technologies, but they are also incredibly powerful and are happening at a scale, at a scope, at a speed, at a disruptive rate that are very concerning to many of us. And so the World Economic Forum brings to this discussion of technology a very clear normative line, a very clear push towards the human being at the center of these discussions. And I guess, Ollie, if I have the time, just to mention 4 key principles that we really want to frame the discussions about the fourth industrial revolution here in Dubai this weekend, but more broadly. And those are, let's think about the systems that are affected, the systems, not just the technologies. Talking about Hyperloop and the potential test track here in Dubai is incredibly exciting. But let's not just talk about Hyperloop, let's talk about the future of mobility. Let's talk about systems. And the forum is organized around initiatives around these systems, such that Stefan mentioned earlier. The second thing is, let's be empowered, not determined by technology, right? Technology is not something that comes from outside this, outside this realm, outside human beings, like magically arriving and shaping the world we live in. We create it. The people in the Global Future Councils create technology in different ways. We shape it. The Emirate of Dubai creates and shapes through its policies, through its investment, through its decisions and networks around 3D printing, around drones, etc. So let's use a discussion of technology to decide how and why we want to move in the future. Let's take this moment, particularly as emerging technologies are still very new, to shape that environment. The third principle is, let's do this by design and not by default. Let's be thoughtful about how we design technological systems together. And let's have that as a broad public conversation, not just a conversation amongst specialized experts. And I guess the final thing to say, Ollie, is the fourth principle is, let's be values driven. Let's have values as a feature of these technologies, not as an afterthought or a bug. And let's put the human being really at the center of these discussions when we talk about what we value.
Thanks, Nick. And I like your use of the word public discussion there. I think it's so important. So I encourage all of you to try to get your readers motivated and engaged in this subject. We need we need everybody, all communities, all of society to be part of this conversation. We don't want to be afraid or scared or unsure about the future. We want to be inspired by it. We want to have an idea as much as we can about what's coming around the corner so that we can plan effectively for it. Do we have any questions at this stage? My old friend Frank Hain over there. Frank, you're online and you're on Facebook, so give us an idea of where you're from and who your question is for,
Thanks.
please.
Frank Hain from the national newspaper, Abu Dhabi. It's a kind of broad question, really. You say, Ollie, let's be hopeful and optimistic and open about the future, but recent events seem to suggest, lots of reasons for fear about the future. And, the WEF is all about globalization and openness, international feeling. The election of Donald Trump as President of the United States suggests all those opposite trends coming back in. I just wonder what the WEF, feels about that, and how, whether the trend towards globalization, an ongoing theme for the last 30 years or so, whether that will continue in the new era.
Well, of course, it's a time for responsible and responsive leadership, which is actually the theme of our annual meeting in Davos. You raise a great point there. Do any of my colleagues on the panel want to take this forward? Mirek?
Yep. For us, the global interconnection is there now. What is needed really is the responsive and responsible leadership. It is about being proactive. So Nick talked a lot about by design, not by default. And so it is really being proactive about the future, thinking about the implications of the trends that we're seeing around us. So it is really being proactive toward the future, shaping it, being knowledgeable about not only the technological aspects of it, but also the socioeconomic implications of the trends that we see around us. Since I work on the Middle East and North Africa, one thing that I'd like to add is that when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, sometimes you could get a reaction of, oh, how is it actually relevant to the different corners of the Middle East and North Africa. So we are here in Dubai and the UAE. This is the most globally integrated economy of the region. So you could argue, okay, is this an exception? What about the rest of the region? What about the fourth industrial revolution and the humanitarian crisis around Syria, for example? But I think what is important here to realize that a lot of these innovations that Nick talked about can have tremendous positive impact on how we deal with humanitarian crisis, from knowledge management, response, coordination to delivery of aid, job creation, etc. So to respond to your question, I think there it's about being proactive, but also just how important the fourth industrial revolution is, not just an abstract concept. It is hugely important for the future of this region, regardless of where you sit in the region.
Nick?
I'll also say that there is a really important connection between technology, globalization, outsourcing, and trade, some of the many issues that have been coming up in questioning around how these systems help or hurt people. And in that, there's the definite possibility that we are actually underestimating the impact of technology and overestimating the impact of globalization. But for me, the hopefulness in this situation comes back to this idea that if we can have discussions that are more human-centered rather than more centered around abstract concepts and values such as efficiency or productivity, where is the human fitting into this idea of trade and technology, etc.? I think this is an opportunity to see how important that is around the world. And to build on to Mirek's point, there's a huge opportunity with emerging technologies to make them more personal and more able to be tailored specifically to the needs of particular populations. And working recently with the International Federation of the Red Cross, we've been speaking a lot about how the Red Cross is using or experimenting with different forms of technologies, such as 3D printing, etc., to deliver very customized services where they're needed in disaster situations. And I know that the ICRC as well has many different experiments, which my colleagues have worked with as well, on that in conflict situations as well. The greatest social injustice of industrial revolutions is actually that they are not evenly distributed around the world. The second greatest social injustice of industrial revolutions is that some people bear the negative externalities of those more than others. And so protecting the most vulnerable as we look through a change of technology and how that affects international relations and changes in globalization, etc., job creation, is an incredibly important framing for the work that the Global Future Councils will do. And I know that all the Global Futures Councils today are sitting there thinking, how does the changing context of the world influence our work? And what can we do about this to be, as Mirek said, as proactive and forward-looking and as thinking from a human-centered approach as possible? So that's really it's exciting and empowering about this moment now.
A good point. Stefan, I'm going to ask if you can develop that, because we're talking about global future councils, but as we're hearing, we need solutions for the present as well. So what are your expectations or your hopes that outcomes from this meeting are going to have an impact on life here in the United Arab Emirates and the world?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, of course. When you're faced with this fear of the future, there's a temptation, and we see that temptation across the world, to provide solutions from the past. Now, there's no denying that many of these technologies that we're describing and are discussing here in the councils are contributing to some extent to social and economic dislocations. And the mandate for the discussions here is really to see can they also provide solutions to some of the challenges that we haven't been able to solve. Take climate. The promise of using some of these emerging technologies, from biotech to advanced materials, to make production processes more efficient, more environmentally sustainable, and so on. So it's for these kinds of solutions that we're looking for. It's these kinds of solutions to protracted global challenges, the lack of progress against which is contributing to some of the discontent around the world, that we hope will emerge from the work of these councils. And that's what makes it so current, and that's what makes it relevant in the present context.
Okay, I have this gentleman here, and then the lady in the front row, please. And then I may throw another of my own questions in there to round things off. Sir.
Good morning, Wael Youssef from Al Bayan newspaper. Do you think that the gap between the first world and the third world would be bigger with this new revolution? And as you are talking about some crises, like the refugee crisis, do you think that the third world should be partner with this revolution, and how can we do this? How can we deliver this message? Because you know now in this region, some countries destroying itself, while others talking in some other place about new world, about the fourth industrial revolution.
Absolutely. What an excellent point. I mean, you don't have to travel very far, and if you consider this country has something like 6 billion people within a 5-hour flight, but you have to travel a lot less far to see all 4 stages of industrial revolution when you step off a plane. So do we need to worry about this? Because it has a risk of exacerbating these vast differences already between nations.
Absolutely, we need to worry about it. And let's be very clear, there is already, as the question implied, a huge gap between regions of the world in this regard. There are about 600 million smallholder farmers around the world that don't use any artificial fertilizer, they don't use mechanical or fossil fuel power to do their work. These are farmers that really haven't realized any of the benefits of the first industrial revolution. There are more than 1.2 billion people without access to electricity and 2.4 billion people without access to sanitation around the world. They haven't experienced the benefits of the second industrial revolution. And there are still more than 4 billion people who don't have access to the internet, who haven't yet come through the major contribution of the third industrial revolution. So we have a huge way to go as a global society to fix the existing inequalities, as much as we need to worry about where the fourth industrial revolution will take us. And I'm very pleased that here at the Global Futures Council's meeting, we have systems focused on food and agricultural security, working with smallholder farmers. We have environmental initiatives working on clean water. We have initiatives such as Internet for All as part of our digital economy and society work, which are really focusing huge amounts of effort and energy across global stakeholders, the world's best experts, but also local country representatives, major corporations, civil society organizations, international organizations, working together on these problems. So that's the first thing to say, is we do not focus on the fourth industrial revolution to leave the rest of the world behind. Far from it. It should be an enabler of these things. However, there is a risk that if the world simply focuses energy and resources on pushing the frontier of technology away, we get a further separation of the haves versus the have-nots in terms of this distribution of technology and technological systems. And the issues of equity and access and vulnerable populations are extremely important in that conversation. which is exactly why we are framing this fourth industrial revolution not as a discussion about production, efficiency, capabilities for developed nations, but rather a global topic around where is the human being, what is the future of global society, and how can we have public, engaged conversations across all sectors to realize the goals that we want as a larger group and not simply as a set of technologists or a set of investors or a set of people who are privileged enough to live here in Dubai or in Switzerland where the World Economic Forum is headquartered, or in any other place where we take for granted the internet, and we may soon take for granted far more powerful technologies.
And I think fair to say also within countries, not just across countries, that you could argue the events in the US in the past week are very much a result of pockets of population, large pockets of population, being left behind or growing and developing at different paces and in different directions. Mirek, you had a point you wanted to come in on.
Sure, thank you. Just to point out that this is also a huge opportunity for leveling the playing field. If you think about this, for example, what this means for skills and education. People talk a lot about, it of course for a region like the Middle East and North Africa, where you do have a skills gap, education deficits, etc., challenge, of course, but there is an equal challenge for OECD countries and other countries where people now need to be more entrepreneurial throughout their life. They need to invest in continuous education. They need to learn new skills. Across Europe, the United States, Asia, as well as the Middle East and North Africa, you have now online learning tools. You have the MOOCs. You have online learning, university courses, etc. So in a way, this is an opportunity to leapfrog, to develop more nimble education systems, prepare your populations to be more competitive in this tech-enabled world. I was recently at a panel at the World Bank in DC, and we talked a lot about the implications for skills and employment of this new reality. And here in the region, there is the amazing reform momentum right now that we see in a lot of the countries. Of course, we see that now a lot in Saudi Arabia, which dominates the headline with the very holistic overhaul of the economic system. And so really the education reform and the labor market reforms are top of the agenda. And this is an amazing opportunity to really build those systems in a way that will make the populations of this region even more competitive globally in this tech-enabled world. So putting in place systems right now that would be producing populations that would be tech-savvy, speaking English, being able to be nimble in terms of lifelong learning is a huge opportunity right now.
Thanks, Mirek. And I want to end this session on a positive note. So I'm going to ask you after the next question just to give us something you're looking forward to, give us something to grab hold of, to be optimistic about. But first of all, let's go to the lady in the front row.
Hi, I'm Jen Moon from Arirang TV. Number one, I'd like to know, I remember last year in Abu Dhabi, we were discussing the fourth industrial revolution and its impact on, for instance, climate change and various different things, including migration, governance. I'd like to know how that discussion has evolved over the past year and evolved or developed. And also, it was the annual summit of the Global Councils, I remember. But this year, it's the inaugural year for the Global Future Councils meeting. I'd like to know what difference there is.
Okay, so maybe Nick first on the evolution of our understanding of fourth industrial revolution. Stefan, perhaps you could give a brief explanation of the evolution of the councils, of the knowledge networks. Nick first.
No, so it's a great question because last year as we were developing this concept, and personally as someone who worked with the Migration Council and has been very closely tied with our environmental initiatives, there has been a shift in terms of the thinking that the previous questions outlined, which is not just how do these technologies impact this particular area of migration or the circular economy, which is where this is developed in the environmental space in particular. but what are the broader set of norms, different governance techniques, standards, policies, legislation, incentives that can be brought to bear to actually transform these systems into achieving the goals that it wants to achieve. So the shift that I've seen is twofold. Firstly, a much more focus on the opportunity of technologies, not just as individual capabilities like I have a 3D printer here today, but as a system of abilities and of technologies that come together to influence this system. And in migration, some of the biggest conversations have been about the intersection between data rules and interoperability as refugees and economic migrants move, and how you can better meet their needs, not just thinking about them having a mobile phone, but thinking about what it would be required to have a bigger data picture where countries were able to share that across a pathway. And that is something that doesn't exist at the moment. It's very hard for international organizations, relief agencies, NGOs, to know whether or not they can use the data that they have from point to point to prepare to deliver nappies at the right time, at the right time for a mother with children who is in need and on a migration route. And these are things we desperately need to solve for the most vulnerable populations. That shift is happening in the discussion. People have been aware of it, of course, in many different areas, but bringing that together with the policymaker discussion, with the technologists and the experts in the standards and that layer, as well as the organizations that use it, has been incredibly exciting. And I could go on with around the circular economy piece, but the same thing in thinking about how you incorporate these technologies into value chains to make maximum use of both biological cycles and hard material cycles in production and recapture, has got us with our partners a very different forward-looking way of thinking about new possibilities and actively shaping those rather than thinking more about, well, what do we take, but shaping the creation of the opportunities. And maybe Stefan can take that forward in the overall philosophy of these councils.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for this, and thank you for the question. It's true that we have close to 10 years experience now in bringing together these experts groups here in the UAE in the partnership that we have. And we have had a wonderful evolution of these expert groups over the years. And we've learned two things that are now reflected in this new network of Global Future Councils, which we're launching here. The first is that we really wanted to consolidate our efforts around some of the big global challenges. We had covered the most important topics over the years, a whole range of colleagues. This year we've consolidated the number of councils around some of these big global challenge questions, the future of work, the future of production, the environment, and so on, where we bring a much more interdisciplinary group of people that need to be around the table to find solutions to these kind of problems. And the second is that, inspired by this exploration of the fourth industrial revolution, we bring in a much more dedicated focus on these scientific and technological breakthroughs. As I said, we have half the network is composed of experts that are working on these technologies, not just experts, actually. We have innovators, we have startups here that are actually at the forefront of these technological innovations. We have a representative from Hyperloop, for example, here that was mentioned in the local context, right? And this is what you were asking for. What makes me hopeful for the meeting. I think we see we are in a networked age where we are facing problems that are increasingly networked. Yet often there is still a lack of connections between the right kind of people to solve these kinds of problems, and particularly in the space of the policy experts around some of these big global challenges, the expertise on really the big transformation on technologies are not always routinely present. And that's a unique opportunity we have here in these councils. We have in the room next door 700 people, half of which are driving these technological breakthroughs. Others are searching for solutions to these global challenges, and we hope that great connections come out of that that will provide these solutions.
Thanks, Stefan. Now we're going to get kicked out of here. There's another press conference with our global shapers, the young generation, who are going to be here in a few minutes. But before we go, I'd just like to, as I mentioned before, give people something to kind of think about for the next 2 days. Nick, I'm going to ask you what excites you most about the fourth industrial revolution, what you see as the greatest concern. Mirek, I'd like you to think about where do you see the fourth industrial revolution most apparent, most evident here in the United Arab Emirates, and where you'd like to see more focus. And I'd like you to, we've maybe covered this already, Stefan, but tell me what your greatest hope and expectation is for this meeting. You first, Nick, and keep your answers very brief, please.
The concern is that we have discussions about emerging technologies and the future of our relationship with technology as insulated groups of experts in silos, and we lose the trust of people. My greatest hope is I see so much demand, potential, and commitment for that not to happen, to have not just the Global Futures Councils, but in the media organizations that we work with, the international organizations and governments, to make this a much more broader social discussion around where the human is, what our values are, what we want, and what the principles should be, how we can get there together as a society. I'm very hopeful of that because we see these boundaries between disciplines and sectors breaking down in new and exciting ways. And as the World Economic Forum, as an international organization for public-private cooperation, as an organization which offers a platform for these discussions, seeing that increasing need and demand is incredibly exciting and hopeful.
Thank you, Mirek.
I think what sets the UAE apart from other entities around the fourth industrial revolution is its focus on government. So how can the governments or government be more nimble around adopting new technologies, working with innovation in a systemic manner? So if you look around here, the work they do with blockchain, the work that they do not only around having the first 3D printed office, but actually working on a building code regulation for the future so that you can have a system for modern urban planning, which includes 3D printed buildings. So it's more around how can governments be part of the fourth industrial revolution, shape it proactively. This is what is very special about the UAE, where they are clearly at the forefront.
Thanks. Stefan, any great hopes that you haven't already covered?
Yeah, the hope is really to bring the scientific knowledge, the academic knowledge, to bear in these very real challenges that we're facing today, and that's the mission of the councils. That's what we're here for, and we're delighted to kick off this meeting.
Thank you very much. And my job is to get this huge knowledge and bring it to you guys and help you all convey it, articulate it in whatever way, and challenge us in your columns and in your news stories. So please do use these 2 days to come to us, challenge us, and ask us for more information. If there's anything here that we're going to be talking about, we'll do whatever we can. Thank you very much. This session is now closed. Thanks for joining us, watching us online. Thanks for joining us, watching us on Facebook. Thank you very much to those of you in the room.